My name's Michelle Jacques and I'm a registered psychologist. I'm here to talk to you this morning about a very important concept that's close to my heart. Looking at our opportunity to think about maximising not only our own mental health and wellbeing, but also the mental health and wellbeing of the people that we work with and for, and the people that are in our organisation. How do we look at recognising that when I is replaced with we, even illness becomes wellness? So what is our opportunity to think about this concept and what we're exploring? We are navigating particularly difficult times. We have a big new challenge that's literally come upon us, and many of us have been especially unprepared. But there's also the daily challenges that we have working in an organisation like Anglicare, where we're dealing with quite stressful situations. So managing those situations is very, very important. We are recognising that VUCA, or VUCA is our new norm. This is the fact that our environment is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And we've got to think about our opportunity to really embrace this new normal and think about how we're going to maximise our mental health during this very complex period of time. Now, just thinking about a little bit of information in and around mental health. At any given time, 1 in 5 of us are going to be experiencing a mental health condition. So if you think about the workplace of Anglicare, potentially 20% of the workforce at Anglicare could be experiencing a mental health condition at any one given time. That's a big proportion of individuals who are going to be struggling with or dealing with a mental health issue. There's been a bit of a changing of the guard. The World Health Organization typically reports every March around what the leading causes of disability are worldwide. And typically it has been physical sources of disability, things like cancer, things like heart disease. However, 2 years ago, this was taken over for the first time by a mental health condition, and that is depression. In fact, now, 5 out of 10 of the leading causes of disability worldwide are mental health related rather than just physical health related. So a big change in terms of what we're experiencing. Mental health costs Australian businesses a significant amount of money, approximately $10 billion a year. And a lot of people think that absence of people from the workplace, that when they are experiencing mental health issues, they just don't come to work. But that's not actually the case. People who are experiencing poor mental health will still often come to work, but we have what we call presenteeism. And that is that they are at work, but they're not being their fully productive self. They might be experiencing poor concentration, difficulty focusing, and their productivity isn't what you'd normally expect from them without that mental health issue. So presenteeism is often even a bigger opportunity to recognise that impact rather than just absenteeism. The Australian Bureau of Statistics is also reporting that we are losing approximately 8 people per day to suicide. Now, I suppose this gives me sometimes, I get up on my high horse a little bit here, and you think about some of the ads on TV and where we're spending our money. For example, the Motor Accident Commission. They get a budget for spending to prevent deaths on our road, which obviously is a very worthy cause. At the moment, the ads I see on TV are all about the hairy fairy, this big hairy man sitting with a tutu in the back of the car saying don't speed in case things will get hairy. Have you seen him on TV? But when was the last time you saw an ad on TV for suicide prevention? I've never seen one, and I'm looking. So we've got to recognise that our mental health is such a big issue, and yet it's not really tabled as an open topic of conversation. Now, with over 13 million Australians in employment, workplaces play a significant part in managing and proactively managing good mental health. So if 1 in 5 of us is experiencing a mental health issue and we spend approximately 8 hours a day in a workplace, there's a lot of time where we can interact and support individuals who might be experiencing poor mental health. Now, what I'd like to explain to you is that a lot of individuals have some questions in and around all these different terms that are used in and around this topic. You know, we talk about poor mental health, we talk about mental illness, we talk about flourishing, we talk about being mentally healthy. What do all these terms actually mean? So I wanted to give you a little bit of a framework to map this out for you so you've got a bit more clarity of understanding. And we use this tool called Key's Continuum. And Key's Continuum has 2 axes. Our axis this way is that we can either have mental health or mental illness. And our axis on the horizon is that we can be languishing or we can be flourishing. Now you think in these 4 quadrants that at any given time we can have individuals in a workplace that might be in each of these 4 quadrants. So we may have individuals who have mental health but are actually languishing. We call this box poor mental health. They do not actually have a diagnosable mental illness, but they are stressed out, overwhelmed, not coping. They haven't been diagnosed with mental illness, but they are still languishing. And this is a very important understanding to have. When we look at managing our mental health, we think about, well, if I haven't got depression, I must be okay. But there is a whole category here of recognising that this is a very important aspect to our mental health. We can also have mental health and be flourishing. In other words, we have positive mental health. We are thriving, we're doing really well, we're operating at our best and highest level of productivity. We also have individuals who have actually been diagnosed with a mental illness and who are languishing, who are not coping at all with that diagnosis. But it is important to recognise that just because you have been diagnosed with a mental illness doesn't mean that you can't be flourishing. For example, you may have an individual in your workplace who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and they are perfectly fantastic in the workplace. No real obvious mental health issues, they are a very valuable member of your team, and you would never know that they've ever been diagnosed with any mental illness because they are thriving and flourishing despite that diagnosis. So when you think about individuals in a workplace, you may have individuals in your team, in your group, that could be existing on any one of these scales, any one of these areas. And therefore, we want to be thinking about how we're going to maximise mental health for anyone in each of these quadrants. So mental health and mental illness, these are often terms that are used interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. All of us at some time have got some element of mental health, but we can be without mental illness. So a fundamental difference between the two, we've all got a level of mental health, right? And it's sort of, important to think of this as a bit of a sliding scale. Now, all of us from time to time can feel a little bit overwhelmed. We could wake up one morning when the alarm goes off and just wish we could pull the covers back over our head and say, no, I don't want to adult today. and have a day in bed where we sit and watch Sex in the City all day with our fluffy slippers on and go, no, I just want to pretend the world doesn't exist today. But then the next day we pick ourselves up, we dust ourselves off, and we keep going and we manage. So we can have a day where we are experiencing more languishing, but then pick ourselves up and move closer towards that flourishing scale again. So mental health is where we've got a state of well-being, where an individual realises their own ability to go work to their best possible capacity, they cope with the normal stresses of life, and they can work productively and fruitfully. You know, it's important to actually think about what you look like when you're in a state of well-being and when you've got positive mental health. You know, most of us feel more resilient. We feel like we can control a lot more in our environment. We feel that normal everyday stressors kind of wash off us more easily, water off a duck's back. We tend to be able to take on more because we're coping better. All right, what do you look like when you're in a state of mental health? And if you recognise what you look like, my challenge to you would be, how are you going to put more things in place to actually reach that goal? What do you need to do to enhance your well-being, to reach that positive level of mental health? So focusing on the development of positive mental health means promoting aspects of the workplace that can help employees realise their full potential. So how are we setting up our work environments, our teams, our interactions, our relationships, our interactions with clients to maximise our opportunities to have good mental health, so that we're flourishing in the work that we do every day. Now conversely, on that bottom half of Key's continuum is when we've got mental illness. So what is a mental illness? This is recognised as a diagnosable illness. So we actually recognise that somebody has been experiencing these symptoms for longer than 2 weeks, and that they're consistent symptoms that impact on a person's ability to manage their normal daily life. So mental disorders can result from biological, developmental, psychosocial factors, and we are comparing them with physical disease in terms of their impact that they have on individuals. And given the current challenge that we've got in our environment at the moment, and we are certainly living in a volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous environment, I think we're going to expect more individuals in the workplace to be experiencing either poor mental health or mental illness as a result of their perception of not being able to cope with their current challenges, and how we might deal with that from an individual perspective more effectively, and how to manage that more proactively. So 45% of Australians are going to experience a mental illness at some point in their lives. I'll be very interested to see whether there is any mental health association currently collecting statistics on accessing mental health services, and whether we've experienced a significant spike in people accessing mental health with the current crisis that's going on. So despite poor mental health not being defined as an illness, so this is that top left-hand corner of Key's continuum where we've not been diagnosed with a mental illness, we in fact have mental health, but we are languishing. Having poor mental health is actually associated with significant emotional distress, and it can be very severe. In fact, in a workplace, this is often our biggest area of concern, rather than just supporting people who have a diagnosable mental illness. So, as I mentioned before, mental health is not static, right? We just don't have poor mental health or good mental health. It is a sliding scale. And we've got to think about how are we taking dedicated action as individuals to try and keep our mental health and our well-being in that top half of the flourishing scale. And then as a team and as leaders in an organisation, how are we actually supporting the people we work with and work for to maximise their mental health in the top part of Key's continuum as well. So mental health awareness, if we create a mentally healthy workplace, it starts with the commitment of individual staff members. We need to consider our own personal mental health, and when we've done that, we've got the ability to look wider than ourselves and support those who are around us. But what we've got to do is often identify when we actually need assistance. So how do we actually work out what stress looks like and what our stress triggers are? And our stress triggers are different for everybody. What really stresses me may not stress you. And what really stresses you may not stress me. So we've got to be cognizant and really think about what are our stress triggers as an individual, and then what might be the stress triggers of the people that I'm working with so that I can manage that effectively. So first of all, what does stress look like? Well, we have got a whole lot to be stressed about at any one given time. It might be workload, it might be people that we are working with who are perhaps toxic and not always pleasant to us. It could be that we're dealing with a whole range of vicarious trauma, and right now also dealing with a deadly virus, just to add into the mix. It's not that we had enough to deal with. So what is stress? Again, it's different for everybody, but I tried to come up with a little bit of a definition that I think will give some clarity. So stress is the physical, psychological and behavioural response to situations, people or events when the perceived demands of a situation outweigh our perceived coping ability. Now, I've underlined that word perceived because this word is really, really important in this definition, right? What we perceive is our coping ability is often how we will deal with the stress trigger that we are exposed to. So you've got to think about then, what are my triggers? What causes me stress? And then how am I looking at problem solving more effectively related to those stress triggers? I want to focus for a second too on understanding the warning signs. If you think about our responses to stress, what are the physical, behavioural and psychological symptoms that are often our tells to indicate that we might be experiencing difficulty? So if you think, for example, about the typical physical symptoms that you might get in response to a stress trigger. And when a stress trigger happens, what that triggers in us initially is our fight-flight response. So if you imagine thousands and thousands of years ago when we were cavemen and women walking through a prehistoric forest, suddenly I come across a saber-toothed tiger that's coming towards me, and my body has got to create a huge amount of energy and almost instantaneously. So my breathing rate starts to increase. My heart starts pumping out of its chest to get that oxygen throughout my blood supply. My muscles tense and coil, ready to fight that saber-toothed tiger. I get some subtle things happening too. My mouth starts to go a little bit dry. The body says, you're about to fight a saber-toothed tiger, shut down every irrelevant system. And one of the systems that gets shut down is digestion. We literally stop digesting food when we're responding to a saber-toothed tiger threat. We get a huge surge of adrenaline, we get a bit nauseous in the tummy, all our blood runs from our feet and our hands up to the core of our body around our heart and lungs where we need it most. So we literally get cold feet. We've all probably heard of that old expression, to have cold feet. So physically, we have this energy burst to respond to a threat. However, thousands and thousands of years ago, when we were cavemen and women and we responded to that threat, we produced the energy and then we used the energy straight away. But now in 2020, when a saber-toothed tiger comes towards us, we usually sit right where we are. All that energy that's produced is not being used, and that's where it becomes toxic for us. So think about the typical physical symptoms you can get. Our pupils dilate, we can get tension headaches, we get neck, back and shoulder pain, we can grind our teeth at night, we can get butterflies in the stomach, shallow breathing, we can even have diarrhea and constipation. In extreme cases, people can actually be sick. We can get ulcers, high blood pressure, muscle tension, and excessive sweating. All symptoms of that fight-flight response that become chronic because we're not using the energy. It's in fact one of the very reasons why often if you go and see a psychologist or a general practitioner, they'll talk to you about increasing your level of exercise while you are experiencing this fight-flight response, in other words, high levels of stress or anxiety, so that you've got a productive way to manage and get rid of that extra energy that you're creating through your fight-flight response, and we take and get rid of that toxic adrenaline and replace it with more positive endorphins. So we get physical symptoms. We also can have psychological symptoms as well. Think of what happens to you psychologically when you're stressed. Our confidence tends to go down. We experience tension, sometimes memory lapses, we get impatient, we might experience depression and anxiety, we get into self-blame, we get angry perhaps, we get worried and anxious, and we get moody. All typical symptoms of a stressful psychological response. And then typically also, from a behavioural perspective, we can get withdrawn. Right? We just want to be by ourselves and shut the rest of the world out and pretend that it doesn't exist. We could perhaps engage in increased use of substances, alcohol, caffeine, chocolate. We could have poor time management. We could even get aggressive and have a very short fuse when we're stressed. We can be quite passive. We can engage in poor or irregular eating habits. And we could lack a lot of sleep, or we could oversleep in some circumstances. So what's your stress signature? Now you might say to me, well, Michelle, when I get stressed, I can't concentrate to save myself. I feel like I'm sweating all the time. My heart feels like it's beating out of my chest. I can never sleep. I get really withdrawn and I self-isolate. But you might say, well, Michelle, that's nothing like me at all. When I get stressed, I feel like I'm constantly up. I've got this excess of energy. I can't stop. It's almost like I become manic. I've got a really short fuse and I bite everybody's head off. I try and do 1,000 things at once without actually getting productively anything done at all. And that might look like you. But do you know what your stress signature actually looks like? A lot of the time, it takes somebody else to actually hold the mirror up in front of us to show us that we're stressed. Okay? You might get home from work one day and your partner says, "What's the matter?" And you go, "Nothing." "Nothing? Are you kidding me? You've come in the house, you've slammed more doors than I can ever remember, you've shouted at the kids, and you've even kicked your poor dog. What's the matter?" And we have to take that step back and go, "Ooh, yes, that was actually me. I did do that. I didn't recognise my stress signature as it came up." So how do we hold the mirror up in front of ourselves to recognise that more often and recognise when we are feeling overwhelmed and look at thinking about how we can take more dedicated, proactive action to that? When we are stressed and when we are experiencing, poor mental health, we engage in impulsive behaviours, we could get aggressive, we have very low tolerance, we have relationship issues, we stop feeling or are oversensitive, we've got potentially a poor work attitude and poor performance, we over or under eat, we might cease exercise, which is in fact the very thing we should be doing more of, given what I just explained to you with fight flight, and we could use more substances. Oh, here we go. Although they restricted themselves to 1 drink at lunchtime, Howard and Tom still found they were not at their most productive in the afternoons. I wonder why. So, how do we take a more constructive attitude to managing that those overwhelmed, stressful responses? Do we consider what our work-life balance is, what our routine is, our physical health, and maximising our opportunity to manage our physical exercise, our nutrition, and our sleep hygiene? Are we pausing and noticing and reflecting on what we're actually experiencing and looking at our own self-talk in terms of some of the talk that's potentially promoting our poor mental health? Do we look at some self-management, some goal setting, and some proactive problem solving in terms of what might be causing us that stress? A lot of the time, if we look at our circle of influence, we focus a lot of the time on things that we can't control and get worried. Where we should be focusing on is the things that we can control. And we can always control our attitude and our thoughts. How do we manage those in a much more productive way? Now, as I mentioned before, different people will have different symptoms. So in a lot of respects, we can't think that just because my stress reaction is this way, that Jane's reaction over there will be exactly the same. Jane will have her own tells and her own stress signature. And as a colleague, it's also important for me to know what Jane looks like when she's stressed so I can support her to manage as well. So what does a person with distress or psychological symptoms look like? Well, we've just talked about those physical, psychological and behavioural symptoms, those tells, and we can look at when an individual is different from what they normally would be and recognising those tells a little bit more often. But there's also some general tells that we can look at as well. People might be absent from the workplace, or if they are there, that they've got presenteeism. So they're at work, but they're not really at work. The incident or accident rate could go up. There might be poor employee relationships. Concentration gets impacted. We've got generally lower job efficiency, and there's job shrinkage as well in that people are leaving the workplace. So we have to sort of recognise when we or others are not okay, when we're struggling or when we're experiencing difficulty, and how to manage ourselves and manage others who might need our support in and around experiencing mental health, especially given this VUCA environment that we find ourselves in at the moment. Now, many of you will have seen this logo. In fact, this "Are You OK" slogan, it's probably in the last 5 years done the most to raise awareness around mental health than anything else before it. Now, I must admit that as a psychologist, I both love this expression and I hate it in the same breath. I have to love it because this "Are You OK" slogan has done tremendous amounts to raise mental health. However, what we've found is that a lot of people are actually taking it quite literally in the workplace. Literally just walking up to people and asking, "Are you okay?" The problem with that is that this question, "Are you okay?" is actually a closed question. So you're likely to get 3 responses when you ask that question. You'll get yes, you'll get no, or you'll get "I'm fine." They're the 3 likely responses that you'll get. And what we want when we want to identify if somebody is actually okay is that we want to start a conversation. And a lot of people struggle to know, how do I actually start to have a conversation? We recognise that there might be things that get in the way of us starting and having that conversation with people. So think about if you're thinking and noticing that somebody else is displaying their stress signature and don't seem to be managing well, what might be in the way of me going up and talking with that individual? It might be that you're worried whether you'll say the right thing. What if I make it worse? What if they get angry at me? What if they just go into denial? All of those things are possible, that we might get an angry response or somebody might shut down, but it's more likely that you've got an opportunity to actually start a conversation. What I like to think about is an opportunity to plan and have a conversation with somebody. And what I've done is I've actually designed a little bit of a cheat sheet which is downloadable with this presentation. And these 4 parts of this opportunity are to plan the chat. So what do I know about this person? What's the right time to have the conversation? Where's the right place to have the conversation? What resources might I need to assist me to have this conversation? Right? When we actually think consciously before we approach somebody about what the best way is to have this conversation, we feel more empowered and more in control to allow this conversation to be successful. The second part of this conversation is to actually look at expressing your concern. Now, a lot of people say, well, Michelle, if you don't want me to use this expression, are you okay? What am I supposed to say? I think it's coming up with a way, given the knowledge that you have of the individual, what's the right thing that will work for them? For example, I was recently working with a leader and he was supervising somebody who was a Marvel Comics nut. Had been to see every Marvel movie, had Marvel figurines on his desk. It was a real, and loved talking about Marvel in the workplace. And so his leader actually recognised that this individual wasn't doing too well, his stress signature was showing. And so he went up to him and he said, "Hey mate, my spidey senses are tingling. I just wanted to check in with you to see how you're going." And with that, he actually thought about the person that he was speaking with and how to connect with them as an individual, and the conversation went really well. So how do I connect with the person? If you're not sure, even a fantastic way even to open up a conversation is, "I've noticed." So if we're seeing a person's stress signature, which has led us to have this conversation in the first place, just starting with, "I've noticed that in the last couple of weeks you haven't been yourself. I've noticed that you seem more withdrawn than you usually are. I've noticed that you aren't your typical happy self when you come into work." All right, actually holding up the mirror in front of somebody can be a great way to just demonstrate, I've cared enough to notice that something's changed and I'd love to chat with you about that. The next part is probably the most critical part of the conversation, and that is to listen and let them speak. If you think about a normal conversation that you have with somebody, and that is a healthy conversation, we've got 2 people, and what they're doing in a conversation is that they're sharing the space between them. But in this conversation, so if we share the space, one person steps into the space, steps out, respectfully lets the other person step in. They then occupy the space and talk, they then step out and let the other person step in. This is what a good conversation looks like. But in this conversation, what we want to do is to step in and tell people what we've noticed. But then as we come out, we want to pull the person in and stay outside and just talk to them and ask them questions. Okay? We just want to continue to ask curious questions. Tell me more. What does that look like? How does that make you feel? Explain that to me, to help people to stay in the space as we stay out of the space and listen. And I think that's one of your greatest gifts that you can give to people in this conversation, is to really listen. And as we're listening, we want to listen without judgment. I know it's a lot of the time we might make a judgment of, well, why is that stressing you out? That's a walk in the park. You should be able to deal with that. Or we say, you poor thing, that's terrible, right? We don't want to pass our own personal judgment on what they are experiencing. This is a very personal thing for them. We just want to explore and see how they feel without passing judgment over to that. The second thing that we want to do when we're listening is that we want to listen with empathy and not sympathy, right? Empathy, by pure definition, is our opportunity to understand somebody, whereas sympathy is often connected with feeling sorry for somebody. So we want to understand, tell me and explain to me how it feels to be you. I was actually at a training session a couple of weeks ago where there were a group of people in the room, and as I was setting up for training, a couple of women came in and sat down at the table, and just through overhearing their conversation, I could tell that recently one of the women, her mum, had passed away. And the other woman turned to her and said, I know just how you feel. My mum passed away last year as well. Now think for a moment. Was that sympathy or empathy? She wasn't trying to find out what it felt like for that individual in terms of her mum passing. She took her feelings and gave them to somebody else. So when we're having this conversation, we don't want it to be about us and what we're experiencing and our emotions and what we do. We want to make it about them. Our last part of the conversation is agreeing on the next steps, or really taking an action plan. And this is about allowing ownership of the person. When we are experiencing poor mental health, or in fact mental illness, one of the overwhelming emotions that we can get is a sense of powerlessness. The last thing we want when we're having a conversation like this is for somebody, again, to tell us what to do and take away our power. So again, we can ask questions. How can I support you? Would you like some assistance finding out where you could find that support? What have you tried? What's worked well? What have been your challenges? All right? And you ask people and guide them through a productive conversation to empower them to consider the solutions that they might like to look at and how you can assist and support that. But again, I'll refer you to this sheet with some really great do's and don'ts on having a successful conversation, and I hope that that's helpful. Now, we've got to think about what if the person doesn't want help? What if we lay out crystal clear, sparkling water in front of the horse, and the horse doesn't want to drink it? Right? If they deny the problem, acknowledge they may not be ready to talk yet. Try to find out if there are specific reasons why. Offer reliable information. You might have some resources available to you that you can leave with somebody that might support them even if they're not ready to discuss it at this stage. Let the person know that you'll be there to talk whenever they'd like to, and just maybe ask their permission to check up on them regularly to sort of see how they're going without being intrusive. So one thing to remember though, if you've got an individual that you're working with, or in fact a family or loved one, and you feel that their symptoms are severe, that's a time where we might need to take their actions out of their hands to provide more proactive support. So we can't force someone to hear a message that they're not ready to receive, but never underestimate the power of planting a seed. To just let somebody know that you're there and that you're willing to be a supportive individual who will listen for as long as it takes while they have, my mum used to have a great expression for this, we just need to have verbal diarrhea and go blah at anyone. And my granny had a favourite expression that went with that, and often a problem shared is a problem halved, and we've got that gift to give somebody else if they need that. So we've got to think though that our mental health in crisis in particular is our responsibility, not just our organisation's responsibility. We need to look out for others and we need to look out for self and proactively manage the work roles that we have and the stressors that we are exposed to. So think of all the things in your environment that you could proactively be doing. We could be limiting our work hours, scheduling meetings during those core work hours, taking regular breaks. In fact, when we work, it's considered that the best working time for highest levels of productivity is 90 minutes, that if we work any longer than 90 minutes without a break, then we tend to lose productivity instead of gaining productivity. Now, I've got there, try not to work from home. That's not obviously the case for us a lot at the moment. We're being forced to work from home. But try and look at an area for your work. Try and think of a particular space that is your work environment, and you leave that workspace at the end of a working day, and the rest of your home is your life, rather than look at confusing the two, which can be very symptomatic. Look at taking your annual leave, set deadlines and realistic deadlines, learn how to say no, have a technology switch off even from your phone, especially when we're seeing constant news at the moment. Having a media-free period in your day is extremely important. Make use of the Employee Assistance Program. Anglicare has got a great EAP program, and you can access sessions at no cost to you to really think about managing your stress levels in a more proactive way, and as a result, managing your mental health. And we want to have some flexible work arrangements, which we have. So some of the things that influence mental health, they include personal and workplace stressors and how they are layering up upon us. And remember, if we are got more stressors than we have resilience, we are going to be overwhelmed by that. So how do we look at our stressors and build our resilience so that our resilience is taking care of the stresses in a proactive problem-solving manner? What are the lifestyle and health behaviours that you're engaging in? What's your exposure to trauma? And yes, genetics do play a part. So think of the causes with respect to stress and poor mental health. They are significant and obviously different for everyone. We could have workload, we could get exposed to trauma, we could have vicarious trauma, we could be getting ill right now. I've got people and loved ones around us who are ill. We could be in pain, we could have lack of meaning or purpose in the job that we're doing. We've got to think about, again, being aware of what those triggers are for our stress and poor mental health, and proactively managing those in a manner which allows us to cope and gain resilience. In other words, we want to be in this top right-hand corner where we have mental health and where we are flourishing, all right, rather than being over on this left-hand side of the scale. So how do we purposefully, with dedicated action, focus on managing our mental health and also the mental health of the team and the people that we work with? So we want a positive mental health, developing environments where employees can focus and reach their potential and their optimal level of focus. How can they live and grow and thrive in the environment which they're setting up for self and which the organisation sets up for them? So how do we create that mentally healthy workplace at the moment? I think we've got to recognise that well-being is not a spectator sport. We cannot get home after a day's work, change into our tracky dacks and our fluffy slippers, sit on the couch with Kentucky Fried Chicken, and then go to bed at 2 in the morning and get up at 6 and just have coffee as our breakfast and expect that we'll have good mental health. If we want well-being, energy in means energy out. We have to invest in our mental health in order to cultivate more positivity and look at managing those stressors. So it's not a spectator sport, it's something that we have to take active engagement in. So think about your everyday opportunity, restoring your physical and psychological resources that are used in your workplace and used at home. What have you got access to that could build up your capacity to manage? Are you aware of your daily work routine? When you're thinking about the potential that many of us are now working from home, how am I setting up that environment to make that a great potential? On the internet right now for Anglicare, there's a blog that I've written about how to set up your workplace for greater success in the home environment and some of the habits that you could get into. Engaging effective strategies during your breaks. So as I'm having a break, am I sitting there just flicking through my phone? Or am I going out into the sunshine and having a 10-minute mindful walk? Am I engaging in effective strategies outside of work? Am I doing enough exercises? Have I got a daily mindfulness strategy that I might like to engage? Am I spending enough time with friends and families to foster positive relationships? Right? Am I managing my professional boundary, or is there blurry lines between that work-life balance that I'm perhaps not managing as well as I could be? So, am I engaging in a mindfulness practice? Am I looking at engaging my best opportunity for resilience? Am I bringing meaning and engagement into my exchanges? Am I fostering positive relationships? And have I got some self-awareness about my thinking, my stress triggers, and my stress signature that give me a greater opportunity to manage and cope proactively rather than reactively? So if we're looking after our own mental health and the mental health of our team, we've got to stand up and be counted, and everyone can be a leader. Don't leave it to somebody else. I hope you've gained some insight, and please don't hesitate to get in contact with me should you like some further support. Thanks very much.